I'm going to talk about here is, well, there's a three-part talk. You're going to get a talk from me on the Virtual Treasury project and how we hope it's useful as a research and a teaching tool. You'll hear from my colleague Lynn Kilgallon, and then you'll hear from Tim Murtagh, who you already know. So three of us will speak, and then at the end, we'll take some questions up at the top table. So to begin with, the idea of the Virtual Record Treasury is to reconstruct the lost records from the Public Record Office of Ireland, which was destroyed in 1922. And it was this very handsome building here. And the building was designed and built as a record office. They didn't reuse a previous facility, as it would happen in many other countries. And the building, it was trying to restore a problem that had arisen over the preceding decades or indeed centuries, where Irish records have been stored in a variety of really unsuitable locations. They've been stored in attics, in basements, subject to fire and damp and vermin eating away at the things and so forth. So because of our predecessors campaigning with the government, the funding was found to make this building happen. And crucially, it came with a Public Records Ireland Act in the same year, 1867. So all the records which were scattered across different buildings around Ireland, around Dublin, were under the ownership of the Master of the Rolls. They were all brought into the Record Office. The building you see here is built in the northeast, the top left-hand corner, northeastern corner of the Four Courts complex. So if you imagine the Four Courts as we know it today, it's substantially larger footprint. The railings have been expanded quite considerably to make room for this building. And what they did was they compulsorily purchased buildings, houses and inns and things, built this as a purpose-built record treasury. It's built in two parts. It's built to be fireproof. The first part to the front, the left-hand part of this picture here, you see has chimneys. That implies that there are open fires in the offices. So the offices are heated by open fires. So that's a risk of flame. They're also heated by gas lamps. Again, another risk of flame. So they're very conscious that these records are obviously flammable. Accidents have happened in archives across Europe, across the world. So what they've done is they've decided to put the records themselves, the precious records, in the rear building with the tall arched windows. This is the record treasury. And they called it the Treasury from the start. So the idea of the treasures of Ireland, the historical treasures of Ireland. The rear building, the Treasury, is lit only by natural light. 10 tall arched windows down each side, a huge glass roof, which I'll show you in a moment. The fittings inside the Treasury are all metal. All the walkways, all the shelving, all the stairs are all metal, so rather than timber, so to reduce the risk of fire. The heating in the rear building is by hot water pipes, and you can't bring any lanterns in, so it's all natural daylight, hot water pipe, which is quite modern for its time. Key to the building is the fire break. The two buildings don't touch. That is a false wall, and there's like a 3 metre, like about a 10-foot gap between the two buildings. And the idea was, in the event of an expected fire, the expected risk of fire in the front building, that they could isolate the rear building and just close. There's like not quite like an airlock, but like double doors out of the front building and double doors into the back building, and they could seal off the back building and protect our cultural heritage. And then you'll also just see, if you can make it out, that the railings, kind of a shoulder height railings around the ground floor level, and inside that is a dry moat. It's like an area like a Georgian house, and that again to provide that extra bit of security. And then the railings of the Four Courts are surrounding the whole thing. So security and safety were clearly in mind and deliberately built into the process. This is the only photograph of the research room taken in its active career. Here you have two archivists on the right-hand side. The man to the furthest right, nearest to me, is Herbert Wood, a great hero of ours because he produces an important catalogue for the work that we are doing. And then in from him is D.A. Chart. David Chart goes north to found the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland in 1923-24. The counter you see here would have been the counter you met as a researcher going in. You would have pulled records. If you see there are little paper bundles of paper here and here. So you would have pulled the paper from the front counter, filled in your docket, consulted with the archivist. They would have sent you to the far corner of the room there to sit, and you would have received your records there. The archivist would have sent a staff member out through the airlock, through the dry airlock, if you like, through the gap, into the rear building, and they fetched your records out to you where you could consult them under the careful beady eye of the archivist. So just like would happen today. To go through into the building itself, into the record treasury, this is again the only photograph of the treasury interior. And again, people often think it looks like a prison, and that's not accidental because it's all metal, so much the same as a prison would be built. And it's 5 stories high over a stone basement. The stories that you see going up are numbered. 1 is the ground floor, 2 and upwards, so a numbered kind of American style, if you like, and then the huge glass roof at the top. The staff with, I think, the coolest name, the Searchers. They always sound like a kind of a 1950s skiffle band or something. But you see them leaning out into the atrium with the records. So I think the bays behind them must be quite dark. So the idea of all natural light has its downside. So they have to lean into the daylight to see the records. And they've got all the accoutrement they need for parcelling and wrapping. They and their colleagues on the clerical archival side did 55 amazing years of taking in accessioning records, smoothing them, flattening them, sometimes just bundling them to clean them. An early version of conservation was taking place, rebinding where necessary, but more crucially, making finding aids, all the things that we could not do our research without. So they produced finding aids, indexes, calendars, and their annual reports they produced every year from about 1868 onwards would often contain extensive transcripts of the more important documents they had, or list calendar items like the fiance, which we can show you later. The Tudor fiance they ran for many annual reports where they included the actual details of the fiance records. So I'll skip right over what happens next because I'll assume a base level of knowledge. 1916 happens, War of Independence happens, the treaty with England happens, and then the dispute over the treaty results in the anti-treaty forces occupying the Four Courts complex, which includes the Public Record Office of Ireland. And then that happens at the middle of April, so the 13th of April that happens. 10 weeks later, it devolves into a shooting match. During that 10 weeks, so the anti-treaty forces occupy the premises at Easter weekend. That's not accidental. They're mirroring Easter 1916. But during the 10 weeks, senior academics in the city, including the chap who had previously been the boss of the Public Record Office, write to them and say, you do realise there's no shooting happening, there's a kind of a standoff happening. You do realise you have the entire paper patrimony of Ireland sitting in the Record Office, between the two opposing forces, and tensions are rising. And both the anti-treaty forces and the National Army Free State forces write back and say, don't worry, everything's fine, we're fully cognizant of the risks, and all measures will be taken to protect the records. But of course, once shooting starts, who can tell how things are going to end up? And they end up like this. So that's the record treasury with we're now inside the courtyard of the Four Courts. This is the roof, the flat roof in the background is the Bridewell Garda Station. And then that's the east wall of the Public Record Office, all demolished there, and burning material has been thrown in through the side wall. And you can see the mangled metal shelving and so forth there. So in a single afternoon, 700 years of Irish history has gone up in a single explosion. The explosion was so huge. I think it was the largest explosion that was ever heard in Dublin. And the explosion was so huge, created like enormously tall, people will have seen the photograph, the enormously tall plume of smoke. But it cast records out all over the city. Records were thrown as far as Howth Head, and I presume tons landed out in Dublin Bay. So the loss was tragic. But that's the bad news side. So our focus is on the good news, on the reconstructions, is what we do. And the work began from the very beginning. So here are people picking up fragments off the street from the day after, the afternoon of the explosion. We don't think many of those made them back into official hands. There was the Royal Society of Antiquaries set up their offices on Merrion Square as a reception centre to take in any scraps that were found. And the Free State government put an ad in the Irish Times that if you find scraps, hand them in at Merrion Square, but almost nothing was handed in. But I suppose the Civil War was really getting hot at that stage, so maybe people felt they'd keep them as souvenirs and risk going out in the streets later. But this gentleman here with the hat on the right, we look on him as the saddest man in Irish history because he's standing in the ruins of his career, like the paper is literally there. But it's from those fragments that an awful lot of exciting work has happened. So going back to 2016, I think it began, my colleague Peter Crooks, who's sitting in the back row there, there was conversations had in Trinity College on what to do for the decade of centenaries that were coming, what would be useful contributions to the scholarly environment, and the idea of doing something for 2022, for the 100th anniversary of 1922, began. And it began with, in fact, David Dixon was involved as well, the idea of looking around and seeing what replacement sources, what copies might be available. And I had initially a 6-week job thinking just to see what's there. We might make a small website. And little did we know when you start pulling a thread, what's on the far end of it. So it grew and grew. we recruited some really generous and super friends and partners and collaborators. The initial round of people that were key to what we were doing were the state archives in Dublin, in London and in Belfast. The Irish Manuscripts Commission, which was set up in 1928, largely as a response to the losses of 1922, and the Trinity College Library, our own host institution here. But rapidly we began to speak with archivists and librarians all around Ireland, north and south, all around Britain, in North America and further afield. And typically, my memory from the earlier days was we would go and talk to an archivist and say, we're looking for copy records that might have been made from records in the Irish archives before 1922, and we're interested in these. And of course, they're not kept in that way in any particular collection. That's not how they're catalogued in most collections. And sometimes archivists would say, that sounds like a nice idea, we don't have anything for you. And then a few days later, they'd get in touch and they'd say, well, actually, there is a collection we were given, or Lord so-and-so's collection, or copies of something. And slowly, these began to come out of the woodwork. And then as we recruited a larger team over different phases of the project, it turned out that as we were experts in medieval and in early modern, experts in 19th century, different colleagues on the team began to know where to look. And we got a very good nose for where likely sources of records are. So we now have over 75, probably more like 80 plus, I think, participating institutions around the globe who are sharing their expertise, their metadata, their images, and their nous with us and their suggestions with us. So how do you do a reconstruction of a burnt archive? This is just one single example that I use for public talks generally. This document is written in about the 1740s. It is part of the Harris Papers in the National Library. The person writing this, just making the obvious point, the person writing this had in front of them a 1291 original from the Middle Ages. So they're writing a history, and they're relying on an original which is there. They transcribe this. It's only a copy for Walter Harris's Histories of Ireland. The 1291 original survives and goes into the Public Record Office in 1867 and then is destroyed in 1922. This, which was only a copy, becomes the only copy when the original is destroyed. It's kind of its nature is transformed somehow. We don't know how absolutely accurate it was. We're relying on the good expertise of this person who wrote it, but it's all we have. So we can put it onto the website. This is one top of a page of a 600-page volume in the National Library of Ireland, and there are 10 such volumes. So the scale of what was possible began to sort of emerge. At the same time, not through any doing of ours, but by happy coincidence, the European Union had funded a research project which was coming out of Austria, which was Transcribus, which many of you will now know, which is machine reading of handwriting. And our colleague David Brown at the time went out to conferences of that in order to say, well, this isn't going to work, this obviously can't work. And to our amazement, it did work, and it worked very well. It is not perfect. We reckon that Transcribus is about 80-85% accurate, but we think, well, better to get that out there, and we're not pretending it's perfect. You couldn't run a document through run a volume through Transcribus and press print and have a book. It's not that kind of technology, but it's very good for finding place names and person names, and that's where most research begins. So it's a tool for getting into large collections. So if you had a 600-page Walter Harris volume, you can now search it. We would never have had the resources to manually transcribe every single thing we found. We have over 350,000 records in the collection now, and it's produced over 250 million words of transcribed text, both handwritten and printed. So that's we were launched in 2022. I'll show you some of the website working in a moment, but there were some important finds, and I just wanted to share one because of this particular audience. Our colleagues in the National Archives Ireland, who we work very closely with, their predecessors went in amongst the rubble, the photographs that we saw, and they spent about a year pulling records out of the rubble and carefully trying to identify some fragments that had survived. They got about 200 bundles, and they literally wrapped them in cotton wool. I mean, that's not metaphorical. It was physically cotton wool, brown paper and twine, and they identified them as best they could, and they stored them away against the day when there would be resources or money or expertise to do something with them. Happily, we were in a position, along with the Irish Manuscripts Commission and others, to be involved in unwrapping, and their conservation team unwrapping and sort of reassessing these. And from 200 bundles, they've made more like 350, almost 400 bundles of records. It's a tiny, tiny fragment of the entire lost collection, but it's a really interesting fragment. And one of the interesting ones that I had the thrill of being in the room as this one was being unfurled was a bunch of, like literally not a scroll, like a folded bundle of yeomanry returns from County Carlow from 1798. And these are the pay dockets. So the yeomanry, you turn up to do your yeomanry duties and you sign for so many days. You say, this is me, and you get your shilling or whatever you get for your week's work. And they're boring, sort of, you can see who's turned up for yeomanry duty, what days they've turned up, and you got the signatures, so who can write, who can't write, and so forth. That's amazing. And so an administrative document, but of course in these administrative documents is where history lies. And on the very first one that was opened, our good colleague Zoe Reid, who at the time was the head conservator, now the keeper in the National Archives, there in the descriptions were local men who were either shot or deserted or dismissed for disaffection in 1798, from the Rathvilly barony troop of the yeomanry of Carlow. So I think like the stories that are there in just one fragmentary survival, to make you wonder what else might have been possible. All the I think I'm saying all, but the vast majority of the records that could be interpreted from those salved record collections, those records that came out of the rubble, are known in the National Archives as the salved records, and they've been listed in great detail now in the most recent edition of An Lecta Hibernica and Lecta Hibernica 53, which is 2022's edition, and that has a long appendix, which is, well, many articles about the fire, and a long appendix containing the records that were salved from the destroyed building itself. So let's have a look at what the VRTI actually does. So I wanted to show you some basic, you all know how to use a website, but our website, I'll be honest, it's complex because it's doing a complex thing. It's reuniting records from all sorts of directions and trying to find one centralized way of searching them. So you have to think archivally rather than thinking perhaps Google-wise, if that makes sense. So if I go onto the homepage and search just for the word Belfast, and it'll give me an array of results. And you can filter, so this is like 5,700 results for the word Belfast. But you can filter by date, and a lot of filters down the left-hand side of the screen. So here I'll just filter a little by date, and then I'll filter, in this case, by repository. So I'm looking at particular repositories or archives who shared their goods with us. And over the left-hand side, if I go down to repositories, you can do any combination of these. I'll just do 2 steps. I'm filtering by repository to Tulcha Éireann, or the Registry of Deeds, as most people would know them. Excuse me. And these records are a wonderful set of records. We're doing very good work with the Registry of Deeds, an important partner for us. And when you click on a digital object like this, on a digital document, you can see its archival, where it's placed in the archival structure of that particular holding repository, its reference number, and then a citation button to give you a long form and short form citation for essays or publications. Scrolling down a little further, you come to the document itself. These you can zoom in and out of, but to search for a word in a document, you retype your search term. So that little magnifying glass on the left, retype the word Belfast or whatever word you're looking for, and it'll find that in the text. As I was saying, this is machine read, so we've got so much of this material, we just put it through by machine, but there's great work being done on this by our colleague Dr. Patrick Walsh and Dr. Brendan Toomey are doing amazing work on the records, on sort of liaising with the Registry of Deeds, and just helping to interpret these and the value of these as a resource. And we find that the more supporting documentation you put around documents, the more the public will come and use, and the more the researchers will come and use them. Another search and filter would be if you went to put in a search term and filtered for a record type. So I'm putting in the word Athlone, doesn't have to be a place name, I'm just choosing place names for this example. You can filter for maps only. I could imagine this being useful for student groups. I've done a little work with this, some student groups on this before, where you could just get the maps, just filters out anything that isn't a map. I like these 1777 Taylor and Skinner maps. They're like route maps, they're a little bit like Google Map on your phone. They present the landscape as a route, and you zoom in on the origin and destination of your journey, and you can follow along as if it was pinned to your dashboard on your coach and four as you drive from Mullingar to where we're going to Athlone and up to that way. Those work well. I mean, everybody likes a map, but they're a good way into the records, I think, for student researchers. For targeted research, if you know what it is you're after, and this might be more for this audience, if you know what you're after, all of the records we have had shared with us by our different partner archives they're all searchable across the whole platform, but you can see just the ones you want, just the repository you want to see by using browse. So you can browse by partner repository. So if you the browse button to the top right hand corner, I'll just show you some of the range, as I say, heading for 80 repositories now, all down the left hand side. But we've so many now, we've added a little index at the top, so you can scroll along, and I go to the letter L for Library of Congress, and you can see records that our colleague Joel Herman has been working on in great detail, and these are particularly polished examples. But I'm just going to show you the browse. You can search within the Library of Congress only, so if you search here, it'll only give you constrained research from that collection. And here you unfurl as you would with any browse function here, and keep unfurling until those little blue arrows, until you arrive at one which is an actual destination document, and then you arrive at the document itself. In this case here, is item of business from 1777. So when you arrive at a document, what do you get? What do you see in front of you? So what you see is the URL at the top. So, well, the title as taken from the sharing repository. The URL at the top reflects the reference number of the holding repository itself, and you see the reference number again. So that reference number works in the Library of Congress, or works in whatever the sharing agency is. The hierarchical tree is there, within what collection, within what series, and these navigation tools are useful. You can view at that level, or you can jump forward or backward in the collection here on the right-hand side, so you can see the preceding or the subsequent items in that particular collection at that level, or move back up the tree for sort of going outside that archival box into seeing something else. And then again, your citation button there for your long and short form citation. You can scroll down to see, in this case, some really nice, very ample metadata created by Dr. Joel Herman. And on the right-hand side, the descriptive elements. These are all done with the guidance of archival experts, and say this is the standard way to do it. And I preloaded this one with the word Foster, so I typed in Foster in advance, so just to save time. So again, this is machine read in that instance. So I think the last one I wanted to show you is just teaching resources. We have so many materials, and it can be quite diffuse to arrive at the front door of an archive and say, where do I go? But for students or for non-expert users, I think to bundle them. So we've made 3 very large bundles, and then a series of smaller bundles, and a series of thematic smaller bundles, which I'll just show you now. So the portals that we're going to see here, portals are imagined like wings to the archive, if you like. So there's medieval population portal, then to be 19th century and late 18th century, and Age of Revolution, which is much more for this audience. And there, where any records relevant to this broad time period and theme are gathered in one wing of the virtual treasury. Gold seams are where the more substantial collections of one particular series. They'd be quite substantial pieces of work. Tudor Fionn's work was done on those by my colleague Saif Nguyen in the corner here. And they would have supporting essays, image galleries with them, and curated collections are thematic. These are smaller but perfectly formed themes. So these can be pulled from multiple repositories, but they're related to one central theme. And these, to show you what's in them by way of sort of teaching resources, you can search again within that one bundled collection. So your search is constrained if your students are researching. We got downloadable books here, media galleries, and then the delving deeper, which is like an expert essay written by a subject expert. And they are all of the curated collections and all of the gold seams would have that type of supporting resources with them. So before I hand over to Lynn, there's the QR code. At any public announcement, I always say this, I was never a great fan of QR codes, but we have a very simple how-to guide. So if you point your phone at that, a little yellow box will appear and you can download it onto your phone. And if you can read it on your phone, well, good luck to you. But it's on our website, and you can download the quick start for the website. So I'll leave it there and hand over to more sophisticated research being done with Lynn Kilgallon. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ciarán. I think there's so much sophisticated research going on across the project. It's too much pressure. My name is Lynn Kilgallon. I'm actually a medieval research fellow with the Virtual Treasury, but I wear another hat, which is the humanities lead for something we call the Knowledge Graph for Irish History. And it's a great pleasure to be here today to be talking about that and introducing this to you if you haven't come across it before. As you've just seen from Ciarán, our work here is about reconstructing those records lost in 1922, but it's also very much about exploring new ways to unlock the histories which are contained within those records. So it's helping us to kind of explore those lives and connections and histories within them. So as you can probably imagine, and you've gotten a sense of, I think, very clearly from Ciarán, one of the biggest challenges that we face in the VRTI is of scale. So when you're bringing together records from across 7 centuries of Irish history, you're dealing with vast collections on occasion, so thousands of documents. They're scattered across different archives, as we've seen. They're written in different periods, in different languages, often using very varied spellings across these sets of documents. So particularly, as a research initiative and for members of the public who are using the VRTI, this can be a challenge. So one of our questions was, how do we begin to navigate these sources? How can we help people find what they need across so many different collections? If we were talking about a single source, for instance, like we're all familiar with, a book, you might turn to the back and use an index to identify, just as a starting point, a place name or a person name which we're interested in, and then discover all of the individual pages that they're mentioned in. We know how indexes work. So if we're thinking about the amount of documents in the Treasury, Ciarán has been talking about, if we're trying to find a precise exact historical person or place across those 7 centuries of records, this is a challenge on a larger scale. So there's a difference between kind of doing a free text search, which might turn up many hundreds of individuals which have a similar surname or a place name. We're trying to find something different. So again, the idea was to see if we could use advances in technology to start mapping some of the relationships in our sources and delving into their content in particular. So this brings me to one of the DH tools that we have been working on, that we've been creating in the VRTI over the past few years, and this is the knowledge graph for Irish history. So at its core, the knowledge graph is trying to answer those particular questions. It's trying to help us map out historical collections across our records. I won't go into a huge amount of detail on it. A knowledge graph is a way of representing information essentially as a network of entities. So it could be people, places, events, or even concepts. And it's mapping the relationships between those entities. So every piece of information that we store in our knowledge graph has a defined meaning that a machine can interpret, crucially. This is made possible because we use standardized ways of representing historical data. So we're taking our data, which is very rich, of course, across all of these documents, but it's unstructured. We're taking this data and translating it into something that a computer can read and make sense of. This is not new. You know, we've used databases before. We're not in the knowledge graph. It's not storing this information in a traditional database, I suppose. So rather than kind of storing it in flat tables, we're using a more flexible structure in the knowledge graph to kind of try and capture meaning and context. And the way we do this is storing information, what we call triples. It's basically, if you think in sentence form, a subject, a predicate, and an object, and it's mapping out a relationship. So Lynn is one part, lives in is the second part, and Dublin is the third. So it's basically, it's very simple, but the concept is really highly extensible. What this does, I suppose, is it makes it possible to link very diverse types of information together. And one of the big advantages that offers to us as researchers is that it helps us uncover patterns which don't necessarily emerge in traditional databases. So knowledge graphs rely on semantic web technology to achieve this. Sitting behind all of the data we hold within the knowledge graph is an ontology. We use one called CDOC-CRM. It's a conceptual reference model which is used very widely across DH and cultural history initiatives. But basically this is what lets us represent the types of relationships we find within our historical data. It's helping us describe those people or places or events, and then the contexts that connect them together. So the long and the short of it is it's a structured, it's machine readable historical record that we can search and we can analyse and we can link to other sources. And I think this is still very early in Irish historical research that we're seeing this kind of technology be used and emerge. You might be familiar, and this is to bring it back from the technical explanation, with other knowledge graphs, even if you don't realise it. So if you've ever used Google, you've probably interacted with their knowledge graph that's sitting behind things before. So if we look at this page, it's taking Leonardo da Vinci as an example. When you search for his name, this panel appears at the side, and it draws in a similar way, structured information. So birth and death dates, famous artworks, the historical period he belongs to, and all of this information is being pulled from other linked open data sets on the web. So it's things like Wikipedia or Wikidata or DBpedia. it's presented in a way that allows the machine to connect these bits of information together. So it's a similar concept that we're using, albeit we're not promising the scale that Google can achieve, but it's conceptually very similar. The idea is, again, to provide authoritative information for events in Ireland's past. It's a growing resource as well, and this is something that's kind of important to remember. It's not necessarily a finished product. So the more we add in terms of new data sets, the connections within the graph can grow richer as well. So this has all been very abstract. Our work for many years has been to put together the underlying schemas and think about how this piece of technology works. More recently, it's been how do we actually present this to public audiences and to researchers so that they can use it. So we have designed an interface for the graph, which was launched in June this year. Which you will see now on screen. And I'm just going to walk through a few examples of what the graph contains and how it might be useful to you. I'm starting with an example, and drawing on Tim here, but it's a person who Benjamin Franklin describes as a man of conceit, wrong-headedness, obstinacy, and passion. So it's a nice flavour of the kind of people we have in our graph. But this is Wills Hill, right? So I'm sure he's familiar to plenty of you in this audience. I've chosen him as an example because he seems to me to be one of those figures that will appear in many different historical and documentary contexts. So career politician, active in Ireland, in Britain, and he's obviously Secretary of State for the colonies as well. He's a good example of a person who will appear across many different records, and we might want help in tracing where he comes from. So he exists in our knowledge graph as a person entity, and the page you're looking at now is a bit like a digital index card taken from our knowledge graph for this particular individual. And we capture various facets of data here. One thing you'll have just seen is a string called a URI, which is in fact his unique identifier. We also have links to external resources. So in this case, this person was drawn from the Dictionary of Irish Biography, who have been very generous in sharing their data set of individuals with us. We provided a link so that you can jump directly to that biography if you're looking for a bit more contextual material on this individual. This is a link to Wikidata. We've also been able to identify where this individual exists in a wider linked open data set, and this is really leveraging the power of the graph to connect outside of the resource we've created to other instances on the web where this individual has been recorded. So we'll see down here, there's various other identifiers where he exists too. At the moment, a lot of the information we have is really based around dating information and person names, but we also have the capacity to capture a lot more in our person schema. So this could be career information, it could be family relationships. It's quite a flexible structure. If we are moving on, I'm going to stick with the exact same example of Wills Hill. One of the main reasons we wanted to develop the knowledge graph is not just to kind of have this exist in isolation as a record of data about these people, but it's to connect these individuals to documents within the Treasury and help people search for them. Now, unlike it's not really going in, and we don't necessarily have the capacity yet to tag every single instance across the Treasury where this individual has occurred, but because we have so much expertise, I suppose, on our team, we can carefully select documents that exist in the virtual Treasury across many collections and add this unique identifier for our knowledge graph person to those records. So it's effectively indexing them digitally, but it's allowing us to pinpoint that precise individual. So this has brought us to a particular record in which Wills Hill appears, and you can see on the item page, so the document page, there's another individual who is also linked with this particular record. So this is Frederick Howard, who I think is another Lord Lieutenant of Ireland as well. So it's just showing you a little bit about how you can use the graph to navigate our documents and see where they appear. The final example I'm going to show starts from a different perspective. So now if you go onto our website, you'll see these distinctive panels which say knowledge graph on them with a distinctive colour. If I go into the portal that Ciarán was talking about earlier, the Age of Revolution portal. This is where we're congregating particular collections of records together. You'll see if it has been activated with knowledge graph entities, if it's been interlinked with this resource, this blue panel appears across the top. And what that essentially means is that whether you're looking through a gold seam or the curated collections on the side, in this case, if we click Explore People, you're jumping right across to our knowledge graph explorer. And if we scroll down, I think we should see approximately 60 individuals who've already been tagged in documents in this collection. So it's giving you a sense of the type of individuals that will appear across these documents who also happen to be included within our graph. So that's a quick intro to the knowledge graph for Irish history. I think we have plenty of work still to be done in bringing our records together, but as I think Tim will give you more of an insight into the potential that this can offer and these documentary collections can tell us. So I'm going to pass to Tim.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Let me just get out of this script. No. Okay, I'm going to do something which is quite risky, which is trying to show you a live demo of the website, and hopefully that works out for me. It usually does, but if it doesn't, I have slides to fall back on. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tim Murtagh. I'm one of the conveners, along with Joel, Patrick Walsh, and Jonathan Wright of this conference. I'm the research fellow, a research fellow with the Virtual Record Treasury, specializing in 18th and 19th century records. And we'll talk today a little bit about some of the goodies that we have to offer for those of you interested in studying and researching the Age of Revolutions. So starting with just the search page, and again, hopefully not repeating too much of what Ciarán did in his very useful introductory sort of guide to how to use the interface. Starting with the sort of, the all-present Google search bar, that is one way to explore our platform. But obviously, as Ciarán has mentioned, underneath this ribbon, you have other ways into the material. And one of the key ones is portals, which will bring you, as we said, to things like the population portal and, of course, the Age of Revolutions portal. Now, again, at the risk of belaboring the point, you can search within the materials that have been tagged within this portal. Instead of looking through the entire holdings which are on the Virtual Record Treasury website, dating all the way back to the 12th century, you can restrict your searches by just using the search bar within the portal. However, you can also then do a few other things. As Lynn has said, you can use the knowledge graph to explore entities, as she just demoed there. You can browse the material that has been presented to you in this portal, which I'll get to in a second. But we also have just a guide to a quick overview panel, which you've been seeing throughout these presentations, of what actual sort of subsidiary collections are in this portal. What are the constituent parts? And I'm going to talk to you today very briefly about the two big projects, the two gold seams that form that form the core of this portal, which is the Irish House of Commons project, spearheaded by Joel Herman, and the Chief Secretary's Office papers, spearheaded by myself. We also have three smaller collections, which we call curated collections, which I'll speak about shortly as well. Now, at every step of the interface, whether it is at the portal, at the gold seam, we try to give supporting materials, not just for usability for people like yourselves, researchers, but also and this will be a sort of a motif in what I'm going to say, for those of you who have teaching responsibilities, the idea that this actually could be a very useful resource for both undergraduate and postgraduate level teaching. I think there is actually a huge sort of utility to be got out of this website in that regard. We provide sort of historical background, descriptive essays, again, users guides, portal highlights, media gallery of certain stories. What we've said here are stories, links to a number of resources such as blogs, and also some slightly more substantive research pieces, which we call part of our Archive Fever series, which I'll discuss in a little bit. But getting to the goodies of what's in this portal, you can click through and it'll give you these pull-down menus organized in around the repositories from which they are derived. However, you will also notice that the Virtual Record Treasury of Ireland is itself a repository. This is for material that we have essentially created, often using other repository source material, but it is either transcribed, curated, or sufficiently processed by us that it sort of warrants its own listing, particularly if it has been arranged or organized in a new fashion than from its home repository. So again, this is showing you what is in this portal, and you can sort of explore this at your leisure. Now, going back to the portal page, you can explore. We'll start with the Chief Secretary's Office papers, just happens to be the one that I did the most work on. Chief Secretary's Office, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, is the sort of it's the Secretariat of the Lord Lieutenant. Becomes essentially an equivalent, I would describe it as an equivalent to the Home Office in the 18th and 19th centuries for Ireland, a sort of interior ministry. It has executive oversight of most, if not all, the functions of central government that are sort of centralised in Dublin Castle. A vast range of responsibilities. And the bulk of its 18th century records were destroyed in 1922 in the fire. Not all, but a good chunk of the routine administrative correspondence. Obviously, that is a quite substantial historical loss of material. What we have tried to do here is taking a much more manageable slice of it from 1770 to 1830 and try to find surrogate and replacement sources for some of those series destroyed. Now, once again, the whole accompanying essays, image galleries, media galleries, etc. are here, but the real sort of joy is to be found in the actual content. Now, this particular gold seam is slightly unusual compared to some of the other ones in our system in that it is exclusively, for the most part, constructed of transcriptions. This is bringing transcriptions of materials that have been scattered across a number of repositories that are being carefully selected. In this case, we have based them around 10 themes. These themes are not arbitrary. They are based on an internal filing system that the Chief Secretary's Office itself used for its materials that were destroyed in 1922. It's not comprehensive. You can add more themes to this. This is a starter batch of 10 primary themes that sort of concern the office in the period under investigation. You come to each theme. We can start with, say, Catholic affairs, which was obviously a very prominent topic in this period, and it'll give you a pull-down menu of what content is there spanning the period in question. Looking at one example I have already, here we have a letter from 1782. Again, this came up in the knowledge graph between Lord Carlisle and Lord Hillsborough, Wills Hill himself, discussing the progress of a bill for Catholic relief in 1782. Again, as Lynn and Ciarán have showed you, these subpages for the items are navigable both through archival hierarchy, through other navigation tools, through previous and next items in the series. They provide you, particularly in these gold seam collections, with actually quite substantive scope and content. That is a description and an explanation of the content of each item. This is sort of the Rolls-Royce version that you are not going to get over, the 250 million words of content on this website. These are specially very highly worked up sort of subsection of material. You're given the source from which it originally comes, in this case SP63, State Papers, held by the National Archives in Kew. Again, those knowledge graph links, which will bring you to the knowledge graph entity pages for the correspondence, giving you their relationship of both sender and recipient. And then the digital content, giving you a diplomatic transcription of the item in question. And then finally, linked source, which is something we haven't actually talked about so far. Linked sources can do two things. They can link you to other sources that are similar to this, where it came from, or in this case, we are giving you a linked source to what this replaces. What was destroyed in 1922 that this acts as a surrogate for? In this case, again, a CSO indirect replacement series for official letters and papers. Now, going back to the browse, in the case of the Chief Secretary's Office, and you'll see this as well in the Irish House of Commons papers, which I'll get to in a second, we have taken extra pains for a section we call Delving Deeper, which was hinted at earlier. These are actually quite substantive pieces of research about the institution in question. So in this case, a potted history of not just the period and the role of the Chief Secretary's Office in this period under question, but internal administrative histories about staff, structure, where possible filing. In the case of the Chief Secretary's Office, we have materials about its physical location in the castle, as well as the residences of Chief Secretaries and Undersecretaries in the various lodges in Phoenix Park. And a particular joy for this particular one, the Chief Secretary's Office papers, is the Chief Secretary's Library, a quite substantial library that the office created across the period of its existence, and which still survives. It was actually accessioned by the Oireachtas Library in 1922, following independence. And the Oireachtas Library have been very kind in allowing us to link to their catalogue, so you can actually search the contents of this quite impressive internal Dublin Castle library. And there's a little essay there as well. We give you as much as we can about the archival history before 1922, before its destruction, how these records were created, filed, and ultimately lost, and of course always further reading to help explore. So I hope you have seen the potential for bringing graduate students or even undergraduate students into a slightly more in-depth investigation of sort of making them understand the sort of archival contexts behind historical evidence here. That's one of the things we're really interested in doing. Now, returning to the portal page and going back to Joel's very impressive gold scene, which I almost feel embarrassed talking about instead of just pulling him up on stage to do it himself. An exemplary piece of work, really, really stand out. Joel has spearheaded this, and I hope he's going to correct me if I stray too far. Now, the parliamentary records of the Irish Parliament from the 18th century were amongst the casualties of 1922. Bills, returns, petitions, proclamations, accounts, journals, speeches. In some cases, many cases, some of those can be compensated, the loss can be compensated for using surviving and mainly printed materials. But that sort of discussion naturally brought up a very interesting research question, which is how much of the actual debates, the text of actually what was said in that building across the road can actually be reconstructed. Using two main sets of materials, one, 37 volumes of shorthand notes by Sir Henry Cavendish, which cover the years 1776 to 1789, right? Sort of propitious years, I mean, American Revolution to French Revolution, as well as 17 volumes of the published Parliamentary Register, which are not as rich, but cover a very usefully cover an overlapping period pushing from 1784 to 1801 up to the Act of Union, over 7,000 pages of content. We actually have a very substantial account now of what was said in these debates in the Irish Parliament in that last quarter of the 18th century. Now, these sources are now, again, not only available online and searchable, thanks to the great work Joel has done, but he has done something else, and this is a really interesting bit of work. Anyone who's explored those debates know that they can potentially be very long, very difficult to navigate. You're reading through an awful lot of text. Following the strands of debate, of topicality through this content is actually quite hard. Joel has produced an excellent proof of concept of curated debates, picking 4 themes: Catholic relief, legislative independence, parliamentary reform, and union. He has curated a sequence of debates, let me get it here, in a, I think, very attractive way. Not just, I would say, for students, but for the postdoctoral researcher as well. In these curated debates, you get not only a very extensive scope and content, which explains to you the substance of what was going on, significance, the later meaning of it. You are also given background on the participants. You're given enhanced navigability of the content. So this is a debate on Catholic relief in the Irish House of Commons, 22nd of May, 1778. Broken into sections by speaker, allowing you to navigate not only between speaker, but between, very impressively by Joel, a very carefully curated transcription, as well as the originals going to the manuscript transcription. However, we also, again, have the knowledge graph links, but as well as that, navigation links to other other debates on this topic contained in the Cavendish transcripts. I mean, this is really opening up this sometimes quite dense collection in terms of navigability. And of course, a very impressive further reading section, sort of bringing people into the relevant secondary literature on this. I don't want to give any hostages to fortune or put Joel on the spot, but that's 4 debates. You can see how this could be expanded quite profitably, I think. Now, other resources in the Age of Revolution portal that we have. at any point, whether it's in the portal or on the main page, you can always navigate to some of the different sections. I mentioned Archive Fever. That's our internal research article page. Joel has contributed a very substantial piece here on the process that he undertook to recreate these debates. There are contributions from other team members on a wide range of things, including material that will be of relevance to historians of the 18th century. We also have a sequence of image galleries. These are, again, galleries highlighting subsets of archival items that we have accessioned into our system with enhanced scope and content, and usually based around themes. So, for instance, for the Age of Revolution portal, we selected a number of documents from the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, Prony, and Belfast. The idea was sort of exploring the Age of Revolution in the holdings of a single repository, which is quite an interesting exercise. And you can scroll down here, again, whether it's the Steel Boy protests of the 1770s, or Cork merchants giving out about the French or embargoes. You can click through to any of these, and it'll bring you, hopefully, to the full stub of the actual item to explore at your leisure. Now, without trespassing too much on your patience, I would like to talk just a little bit about some of the smaller components of the Age of Revolution portal, the curated collections. Namely, the one that I happen to also be quite interested in, which is the calendars of the Rebellion Papers. This was undertaken over the course of last year, and into early 2025. Again, the Rebellion Papers, one of the largest, I would say one of the largest surviving bodies of 18th century Chief Secretary's Office materials for very unusual reasons. While the routine correspondence perished in 1922, this is a body of material that it seems was extracted at the time from larger bodies of administrative correspondence out of political sensitivities. This is material relating mainly to the years preceding the 1798 rebellion and immediately afterwards. It's a particularly interesting and rich collection in the sense of just the material is, the only way to describe it is juicy. Informers reports, actually some quite substantial series of informers reports, security correspondence, memoirs, intercepted correspondence and confiscated materials, diaries, letters of radicals and revolutionaries, prisoner petitions, and of course a very rich section of court-martial documents from 1798 and the years immediately after, actually giving quite substantial sort of near first-hand testimony of people on both sides of that conflict. A set of 5 calendars for this collection, nearly 10,000 items, have existed for the last several decades, but you can only consult them physically in the National Archives of Ireland. They were a mixture of typescript and handwritten. We made sure and over the last year, we got them very accurately transcribed. So this is an accurate transcription of what these pre-existing calendars are. There are possible errors within those calendars. We are slowly working with the National Archives of Ireland to, if there are egregious errors, fix those. They're not, thankfully, doesn't seem too common, but they provide us with the archival hierarchy that in the future will allow us to provide actual digital content. We have already platformed a number of items which we have digital images derived from microfilm and increasingly with the help of the National Archives of Ireland, freshly imaged items. So I'll give you one example that I'm quite interested in, which is again a proceedings of a court-martial in County Carlow in 1799. We give you the scope and content, about significance. In digital content, we will of course give you the images, but we will also sometimes, can't do this for every item, give you a diplomatic transcription. So you can actually sort of go in and cut and paste that. Now again, the Rebellion Papers has supporting documentation with the delving deeper, which I won't go into, but again, supporting essays about the content, significance, archival history, as much as we can reconstruct it. Now, just so I'm not focusing exclusively to the detriment of other facets of what we have, outside of the Age of Revolution portal itself, as interesting as those components are, we do have other material that will be of interest to 18th century, 19th century, and to early modernists, scholars of Ireland and the Atlantic world. One of the ones I would like to bring you to is the 1766 religious census. Now, demographic records are a whole rabbit hole we could go down completely, it's a paper unto itself. But our colleague, Dr. Brian Gurin, I would say one of the foremost experts on Irish demographic and census data around, has done some incredibly groundbreaking work here. 1766 religious census, it's significant. The year, the death of the Pretender, the fact that the Irish House of Lords commissions Church of Ireland clergymen to carry out essentially a religious census of the country. That's not a coincidence, it happens that year. Now, while a good chunk of the content has been lost, Brian has reconstructed over 50,000 names from the 1766 census, as well as reconstructed the archival hierarchy of nearly 800 census returns. So, I mean, this is, I think you don't have to be a demographic historian or even an economic historian or social historian to see the value of this for researchers of the 18th century and the Age of Revolution. Similarly, we have, for those working perhaps on slightly earlier periods, the State Papers Ireland, which is an initiative spearheaded by our colleague in Kew, in TNA, Dr. Neil Johnston, brings together material from the State Papers, not unlike later collections like the Home Office Papers, from the archival series SP63. Now, the State Papers Ireland series runs, as it says here, 1509 to 1782. It's absolutely vast. This project takes a small sliver of it, as we have done for other projects, from the Restoration to the death of Queen Anne, 1660 to 1715. Again, allowing you to navigate through it through not only the images of these volumes, but transcriptions and essentially a fresh calendaring of this very rich, very voluminous content. Now, this is just a taster of what is in the virtual record treasury. You're going to be able to find things that are relevant to your researchers as researchers of the Age of Revolution outside of what I've just shown you. I could list a few things here, such as the Dublin Philosophical Society papers, which are a fascinating resource for sort of study of the early 18th century sort of knowledge cultures and associational life. But I suppose the question I would end with is, what is next? We see what you've just been given there, that little demo, as basically being just a starting point. It's a starter batch. I've sort of hinted at some of the ways these things can be expanded, whether it's additional items within themes, whether it's additional batches, whether it's simply enhancing using some of the opportunities that Lynn has described with the knowledge graph to enhance usability through sort of network analysis almost. So the sky is the limit in terms of actually adding content. And as Ciarán has was sort of hinting at in his paper, when we started this several years ago, we thought it would be a problem of a paucity of sources, a problem actually finding content. It has actually been the opposite. Once you begin to sort of look for surrogate and substitute rather than direct replacement sources, even if they're very strong, nearly direct replacement sources, you actually have an awful lot of content to draw from. So I think this is potentially the future potentially looks bright for recreating 18th century Irish records. Thank you.